A taxing problem affecting so many of you out there. The alternative minimum tax sucking hundreds of millions of dollars out of Americans' paychecks and investments. Scott Cohn on what lawmakers are finally trying to do about it.
A tax originally aimed at the rich, but more and more Americans from coast to coast are getting hit. Tough for Congress to ignore anymore.
If the tax laws do sunset after 2010, the AMT will continue to spread rapidly.
Today, the House Ways and Means Committee heard ideas on how to fix the alternative minimum tax.
Unless you decide to move to a state with lower tax rates or put your children up for adoption, it's very difficult to change your situation from one year to another in order to avoid the AMT.
It seemed to make sense in 1969, a tax aimed at a mere 21 millionaires who otherwise managed to pay no taxes. But because the tax isn't tied to inflation, now it hits as many as 4 million of us. And it's about to get much worse this year.
If Congress doesn't pass the same kind of tax relief or the tax extender that raises the income level, then 29 million people would be affected in 2007.
The AMT has become a big revenue source for the government, an estimated $70 billion this year, even though it was never intended to be.
Congress made a mistake when they enacted the AMT. They did not index it for inflation. So families with lots of kids at middle incomes get hit with the AMT.
How hard? The Tax Policy Center reports people who pay the AMT for this tax year will owe an average of nearly $7,000 more than they did for last year. And by 2010, just 3 years from now, it'll smack half of those earning between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. Republicans and Democrats agree the AMT unfairly targets taxpayers, but figuring out how to fix it and do without all that money is not proving easy. On the Money, Scott Cohn, CNBC.
We are following your hard-earned money tonight with Democratic Congressman Richard Neal, who led the AMT hearing today, and Republican Congressman Thomas Reynolds from New York. Representative Neal, let's start off with you. Why has it taken Congress so long to fix a problem that has existed for so long?
Well, I think there was a reluctance on the part of the Republican majority in the House because it didn't square with the tax cuts in 2001 and 2003. You heard by way of introduction there are 29 million Americans who are going to face alternative minimum tax next year if we don't do anything. And I propose to cut taxes for 29 million Americans, and that's precisely what we intend to do in the House of Representatives.
So that is your proposal on the table. That's your fix?
Well, we're going to offer that fix over the course of the next few weeks, but I want to tell you the bottom line is a tax cut for 29 million Americans.
Representative Reynolds, that sounds pretty good to me. 29 million Americans getting tax cuts.
It's a bad tax. It's a stealth tax, as I call it. It ought to be eliminated, period. I think sometimes some of my colleagues on the Democratic side see it with just one eye. There's been a lot of history on both parties relative to how the AMT tax got created. The reality is, will we come together to do the tough things to get a permanent repeal and at the very least extend a opportunity again this year, as we did last year, to make sure that middle-class Americans are not caught up in this bad stealth tax?
What are you proposing then?
Well, I have a bill out that says 1 year extension of where we are now, so it does not allow the creeping in of more middle-class Americans. But I want to work with Chairman Neal. I want to work with the Democrats to see if we can't get a permanent repeal. But I think both sides agree that it could cost nearly $1 trillion. And the real tough thing is going to be, how do we go do that tax cut? Now, I believe in tax cuts, so it's pretty easy for me to give Americans a tax cut. But I assure you the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts that were passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bush were not the factor as to why the stealth tax exists today.
Representative Reynolds, it sounded like you wanted to get in there. I mean, Representative Neal is essentially extending an olive branch here. He says he wants to work.
Tom's a good friend of mine.
He likes tax cuts.
Tom's a good friend of mine, and in fact, there are 58,000 people in his congressional district that come next year are going to be faced with alternative minimum tax if we don't do anything. So I know he's going to partner with me to help get this done.
We need the tax cut.
All right. So I guess the debate, though, is on who will be taxed. I mean,
well, let me give you another number here.
Everybody seems to be agreeing on the tax cut, but
let me give you another number here of how serious this matter is. By the year 2015, 40 million Americans will pay alternative minimum tax, and they will overwhelmingly be in the category of those who earn between $75,000 and $100,000 a year and have 2 children.
Sounds pretty good. Hey, I do want to ask you guys about who specifically will get the tax cut, because both of you agree on the tax cuts. So where does the disagreement lie then?
Well, I think people between $250,000, we will consider working with a phase-in, and for people under $250,000 in annual income, then in fact they are going to be alleviated from ever having to pay the alternative minimum tax again.
Sounds like you're raising taxes on people who make more money.
We are suggesting that it will be revenue neutral, and we're having hearings so that we'll have an opportunity to outline for the American people clearly what faces them if we don't do anything. And I think at this time and place, everybody agrees we have to do something.
Representative Reynolds, what do you say about those tax cuts and who gets them? And is it raising taxes on people who earn more money?
You bet it's raising taxes if you're going to pile on to, say, some class of Americans to pay more and having others not pay as much. The real question is, does anybody in America think that they're paying too little in taxes, and that's where we ought to target a tax increase? I think the real question will be the devil in the details of how we get a plan. Chairman Neal is right. We need to work together, Republican and Democrat, to rid the AMT tax. But I don't look at it as putting a tax increase on one class of America in order to have it come away from another. We need to eliminate the stealth tax altogether.
That's precisely what we're doing right now. People who make under $250,000 a year, who have many dependents and live in states like New York or Massachusetts, California, or New Jersey, they in fact at this time are subsidizing the tax cut for people who have done very well during the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts. In fact, they did extraordinarily well, and it was, again, paid for by people in middle-income America.
All right, that's going to have to be the last word tonight. Thanks so much on this debate.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.